Okay, it is 4 o'clock, so I'm going to get going here. So this session is new curriculum and incorporating Indigenous ways of knowing for K-3 math. I am Tammy Johnson. I'll explain a little bit more about myself after. I am under the umbrella of ERLC for the ARPDC, well, that's acronyms, which is Alberta Regional Professional Development Consortia, and Learn Alberta funds us. Do a land acknowledgement first before I get going. So Tanse, I live on Treaty 7 land, which is in Calgary, ancestral home of the Blackfoot people. They're also Dene and Métis Nation number 3, which I belong to, as well as Manitoba Métis Federation people here. And everyone has contributed to shaping of Alberta and Canada. And if you happen to know which treaty land you live on, or if you're close to a settlement, wherever it may be, or if you're not, the land of the people that were there before they were removed, you can put that in the chat. So if you've attended my other presentations, bear with me. I know, but we have to identify ourselves, obviously, let you know kind of where I'm coming from and why I do this work. So I am Tammy Johnson. We're called Designers of Professional Learning now through ARPDC, which I think is a kind of a cool title because it really encompasses the various things that we do. And especially now that we're all working together within the consortiums, there's 7 of them, but we meet and collaborate more now that that's happened. So we've got a bigger pool of people with some really great knowledge and many, many years of education and teaching. I am Red River Métis from what is historically known as the Red River Settlement in Manitoba. My family is from Selkirk, Manitoba, which is just north of Winnipeg. I did go to school in Winnipeg. My family names, the 4 main ones, are Mowat, McDonald, Mackay, and Beaudry. My mom's a Mowat. And that's a picture of my great-grandpa sitting there, the gentleman sitting by the rocks on the bench. There's a school and a park in Fort Saskatchewan named after him. It's James Mowat Elementary in Mowat Park. And then in Edmonton, there's James Mowat Trail. It's spelled with 2 T's, but like I always say, no matter. It was actually spelled M-O-A-D when my first ancestor came over, but the English not understanding a Scottish accent or not wanting to listen to how to spell it, they wrote it down that way, so that's fine. And then beside that, that's a picture of my grandpa, his 2 brothers and his sister. So that's the middle boy, Rosser is my grandpa. I think the picture is taken around 1906, because I'm guessing he was about 6 years old then. And that's my great aunt Tassie, Uncle Oliver, and Stanley with him. Yeah, and I started teaching in the same school division, Seven Oaks School Division, if anybody's ever lived there, that I finished my high school in, and ended up working in the same school division, which is parts of it are in the core area of Winnipeg. And then I moved to Calgary in 1994. I worked a lot with special education over the years and Indigenous students, as well as volunteering for organizations, particularly one with Indigenous girls, ages 10 to 17 for 12 years. I started to do this work to help teachers to feel more comfortable with using Indigenous ways of knowing and being in the curriculum, because it is a requirement, first of all, of the Alberta curriculum. But I also know that from doing some work of my own and being Métis, it's not an easy task. It came fairly easy to me to do that for, I did a project with Kataskino Tribal Council and an online school, Ignite, where they contracted me to take their outreach program from grade 7 to 9 and indigenize it for their particular culture and decolonize it and add land-based learning, as well as the Cree language, which I'm learning now actually. And I worked closely with them, and then their elders took that information as well and worked with it. And I had a really great time doing it, and I loved working with their specialists and their elders, and I learned so much and found that I just had a really great affinity for it. But then I realized how difficult it could be, first of all, to find good resources if you don't have the time to research all this stuff, because that's a good part of my life is researching and finding these materials, but then how to implement them. And I know teachers are often afraid of appropriation and disrespectful behavior and what can you do and what can you not do. So if you have ever attended any of my sessions, you'll know that that's always my focus, is try to assist teachers. So if you ever have any questions like that, you can always ask me. I don't have all the answers, trust me, but I do know lots of people that I can ask. So ARPDC, as I mentioned, is our big umbrella, right, for working together. And they have an amazing website that has so many resources that have been developed by our teachers across the province. Some people in the past have been seconded. They don't do that anymore. The system's changed, but I know there's a few people that are still in that position. But then some of them are like myself. I'm now self-employed and not retired necessarily because I'm not quite there, but deciding to work on my own. And then there are many retired teachers as well that do this, that have so many years of experience and knowledge. And so as you can see here, there's tons of materials already. If you wanted to find more of the Indigenous ones, you go to Empowering the Spirit. But then you can also go by focus too. So here, so if I just click on First Nations, Métis, Inuit, because that is our area right now. And you can even go like to audience. You can choose who it's for, obviously the level, and then the type that you'd like. But these are all the resources that are related to FNMI right now. And as you can see, there's quite a few. And there's more being developed all the time. I just thought you should be aware of that because there's lots of really great stuff there that's already been developed and has been vetted, and you have that right there. All right, so I'm going to look at, in this session, the new curriculum math organizing ideas, because that's what I base the work that I've done, because I think that getting super specific, I would have to do an entire session just on one area. And I can, not saying I can't do that, but I'm not a math specialist. I'm a generalist, and I train in elementary as a generalist and mostly taught junior high, honestly, I have to say. And I've taught everything from, well, I worked with tough, mild, moderate kids in preschool. I've taught at the college level, and I've taught all different courses throughout high school and that sort of thing as well. And I worked in a homeschooling program, which meant I had to know all the curriculum at the time, especially working with parents that were doing like the traditional type homeschooling. So I do have awareness of all of them, but I probably will collaborate, I'll be honest, with the math specialists and science specialists this year in some capacity to develop some of those more specific things. Because I know people are always asking me that, but I prefer to work with the people that's their area, right? I know the Indigenous ways of knowing and being, and I've got that stuff to work with, and I can show them how to infuse it, and we can bring in some of those things. So I will touch on, looking at incorporating some of that stuff and land-based learning and some hands-on activities and some inquiry-based math and some games and resources and things like that, so that you can look at and just give you some ideas, maybe tweak your imagination in terms of what you can do. So the Learn Alberta curriculum, as I know everybody's had to go over this so much the last couple of years. Just to refresh your memory, I'm sure that everybody remembers this anyways. But even if I click on the kindergarten, and I know that because it spirals still, right, it goes across the levels as it continues to grow, right? But that first one, numbers, quantities measured with numbers and enable counting, labeling, comparing, and operating. That's just at the kindergarten level, and I know in grade 1 it builds from there, and so just to give you that idea again, right? So we go through all those knowledge areas, and what ways can quantity be composed? How can addition and subtraction provide perspectives of number? How can addition and subtraction be interpreted? So keeping in mind, those are the ideas, right, that I'm thinking of and focusing on when I'm looking at doing this work. So just know that when you're trying to incorporate Indigenous ways of knowing and being into the curriculum, it's important to have a perspective, right? What is Indigenous knowledge? What is Western knowledge? And another way of just saying that is the worldview difference, right? And I do an entire session just on worldview and talking about the difference and how that approach is. The risks are, in terms of taking Indigenous ways of knowing and being and incorporating it into the curriculum, is weakening Indigenous traditions by generalizing and taking them out of context. So what I mean by that is, and I've had this discussion with a colleague, actually just a couple of weeks ago, Indigenous ways of knowing, when you say fit them into the curriculum, it's kind of, I think it's a best way I can put it, it should be a fallacy, right? Because you shouldn't be fitting them into the curriculum. It should be, the curriculum should be fitting into Indigenous ways of knowing and being. I'm going to put it that way. But because of the way the curriculum is set up and the way that we're taught to go about it, it's a different mindset. So what I mean by that is, you can't change an Indigenous teaching. So if you're using something specific that has to do with Indigenous ways of knowing and being, you really have to take it and apply the curriculum to it. So I'll explain some of that as we go through, instead of trying to fit it into the curriculum. So again, it's a little bit of a different way of thinking. It's really important too, to not deny cultural differences in order to find commonality. And again, what I mean by that is, within Indigenous cultures, and I use the word cultures instead of tribes, because tribes is something that was also a colonial term that was given to the First Nations people that were here. But the cultures, even within, like, for instance, my family being Métis, there's Cree and Ojibwe in our family, and Cree culture it's huge because it's all across Canada pretty much. I mean, it goes into Quebec, and through the plains, it goes back into part of BC in the north. And so it's the largest group of people in Canada. But within that group, first of all, there's 5 main dialects of the language of Cree. But within that, there's differences, just like any other place in the world. If you think about the language of English and you think about the different places in the world that people live and speak English, and there's commonalities, right? So the commonality within that language is, like, our elders tell us they're teaching us Cree. If you go and you speak Y dialect, which is what I'm learning, Plains Cree, to somebody who speaks Swampy Cree or Woodland, which is closest to us, they will start to be able to figure out what you're talking about. The words won't all be the same, but they'll have a general idea of what you're saying. Just like in English, I have to say, my daughter and I visited Yorkshire. My Nana's family was from Leeds, and we ended up, the gentleman we were talking to got really comfortable, as you do when you're speaking, and got faster and faster. And we both looked at each other like we had no clue what this man was saying after a while, right? It was just like, what? And so he actually stopped and he looked at us because he could see the bewildered look on our faces. And he's like, you didn't understand anything I said right now, did you? And we both went, nope, no clue, right? And it's not just the accent, it was just the expressions he was using, the idiomatic expressions he was using. Even some of the structure of his language was different. And that was English, right? So think about it like that. So that's one example, for instance, if you think about with language. But then there's also Indigenous ways of knowing teachings or teaching. So I can go to one, so for instance, I went to a sweat lodge on Sunday. I can go to one sweat lodge and the person who runs it a certain way. I can go to another sweat lodge, which I go to one for my Cree elders that I go to, and they run it a little bit differently. There's nothing wrong with their teachings because the protocols are pretty much the same. And what I mean by that is what you need to do. For instance, I'll say, as a woman, I have to wear a skirt. I have to sit a certain way. I can't cross my legs when I'm in there. You have to go around. You can't cross the threshold. You need to walk around it. You don't wear any jewelry that has silver in it or gold, like any metal. There's protocols, there's things that you can and cannot do. Women can't be on their moon time when they go into the sweat lodge. So those are common protocols. And I know if I go to a sweat lodge, those are pretty much things that are going to happen, but it may not operate exactly the same way, the person that does it. So teachings can differ. And so that's what I always say when somebody asks me, well, how do you do this or how do you do that? And I say, well, this is what I was taught. And this is what we all say pretty much. We're like, this is what I was taught by this particular elder. And this is what I follow because this is what I was taught. And so in that way, you can't in a classroom, for instance, and way back, right? When I was in school a long time ago, like 70s and 80s, it was basically, well, all Indigenous people did, and it was Indians back then, do this kind of thing, right? This is an Indian tradition or whatever. Obviously, we know now better that we need to look at people from their culture, just like we would with any group of people with their culture. So I think we're more sensitive that way too, and you have to do that with Indigenous cultures as well. So it's important to know. And the third one is the risk of assimilating Indigenous knowledge in a way that it becomes invisible. So we want it to become common practice, but we don't want it to kind of be this thing that just kind of hangs on the wall, like there's a medicine wheel on the wall. Cool. Like I've done my part, or I wore an orange shirt to, on the 30th, I'm good, like that sort of thing. And something that just disappears, right? For me, it's really important, any teaching I do, and not just with Indigenous, learning, that it should always be authentic. So it's really important. And I know that can be a daunting task. So like I said, that's something that I want to be able to help people with. So this website, and I guess I'm not going to go over things in great detail with websites, but you'll have the links that you can look at yourself. Just kind of in a comparison, like I said, I do a whole separate one on Indigenous worldview and Western worldview. But this is kind of a, it's a 7-pager here of just kind of a breakdown, right? And looking at the differences between Indigenous knowledge and Western knowledge. And really, as you can see, I took that idea out of there, right there, the research. But it's really important to understand the difference, right? So it's a different way of looking at the world. It's learning from things as a whole in a circle. So if you always can remember the circle idea of, like the medicine wheel, or we do sharing circles, we always meet in a circle, we do a round dance, we do everything's in a circle. The drums, like it's a metaphor for life and a circle of life. And so if you remember that in terms of everything is interrelated, everything is connected, whereas in Western knowledge, things are compartmentalized. You learn math, you learn language arts, you learn science, you learn social studies, you go to PE. In Indigenous context, those things are all done together at one time. You can't separate them. Anyways, with that said, I know now I'm going to compartmentalize this with some math, but just going to give you a little bit of background. And we're still, right now I've got this as land-based learning, but we're switching to culture-based learning, because you can do land-based learning inside the schools, right? You can do things like I can take a drum and I can take a rattle and I can take the medicines and I can take those inside and I can teach all about those things and where they come from and the things that they were used to make it were all from outside and in nature. And the medicines too. I don't have to be sitting on the land. It's optimal if I am, but if it's 40 below outside, I'm not going to do that with kids. So there's a lack of understanding in terms of some of the people that are, especially that are non-Indigenous, to understand that that's still land-based learning, even if you're inside. So we're moving to that culturally based learning expression instead soon. So I'm just going to show you this. It's not very long, this video, but a really cool way of doing some math, but it's on the land.
So this is called the Indigenous Knowledge and Mathematics Community of Practice, which is housed under the Math Knowledge Network. So we are the subject association for First Nations, Métis, Inuit Education Association of Ontario, and we're working with a variety of school boards, community partners, university partners, and First Nation schools and organizations.
I think in order for us to function and to move forward, we have to keep that ceremonial concept of how we're going to get there, because the spirit will carry us to that space where we need to go. With that guidance of our ancestry is what we need to appreciate.
The reason I came was just for the experience. There's a lot of things that I know I hear about that I just don't have the background knowledge for. So coming and getting to participate in the ceremonies and the circles and going for the medicine walk just gives me different ideas of how I can take this knowledge and then we can work the math into it.
If you only see one way, you will miss the great teachings that will come to you. You will miss the spirit and intent of our people.
Oh no, East Kent, mother. East Kent. It's Peter, East Kent. And I gotta trim it.
The math class? You can tell me how much birch bark pieces you see on here? How much does it take to do a panel?
We need to really drastically take a different approach to how we're doing things in education. There's a lot of great things that come out of studying the physiology of plants, the anatomy, the systems, and how they interact with each other. And then how does that complement the traditional knowledge that knowledge keepers have that have been using, these plants and medicine since forever, and look at how they can both complement each other and move us forward in a better way.
If you're coming at it from a good space, from your heart, you're doing it from your heart. then go and get those resources, and those resources are teaching, the teachings that you need to feel comfortable, so you can teach that.
There's not just one way of knowing math, and I think that's what this project really reinforces, that well, everyone looks at it in different ways. We need to honor it, and if you can do it quicker than I can using this method, then that's what works for you, and you understand it. So it's developing that deeper understanding of math. So it's not just about here's the set of procedures that I have to follow to get the answer. Here's the formula I follow. It's why am I doing it and why does it work?
I'm gonna get past this video because otherwise it'll start again. So to give you just a little bit of an idea, I know the first thing that I thought of when I was asked to do the curriculum for Katasca now, when I sat down and I looked at the math curriculum, like science, I was like, oh yeah, that's doing land-based science. That's easy, right? That's kind of a no-brainer for most of it. But when I looked at math at first, to me, that was the most daunting thing. Because I'm, like I said, I'm not a math specialist. I'm a generalist from elementary. And I just went, wow, like, whoa, especially junior high. I was working on something like, how am I going to do this? But actually, I was amazed once I started getting into stuff and researching and finding resources and just thinking about changing my mindset about this. It was easy. Surprisingly, by the end of it, I was just like, yeah, like there's so many places I can do this. This is really cool. Because I always loved being outside as a kid. That's all I did when I'm stressed out. That's what I do. I go for a walk. I bought a house that has tons of trees in an older neighborhood. Like that's me. I have to have those things around me. And so to think about how would I do this, if I was teaching and I had a space I could take my students to. Just to give you some ideas, just even off the top of my head, right? Like when I sat down and doing this, it was like patterns in nature. Right, we in elementary, that's something you're always looking at, but those patterns, those repetitions, those things like that are amazingly everywhere. And so it really ties that into math everywhere, including science, right? When you put those together, measuring with found items. So, finding things outside like pine cones or sticks or whatever, when you're doing those measurements instead of doing it, with a ruler before we use the ruler, or even after we've got the kids to use the ruler, like because people developed how to measure things in different ways. For instance, we have different measurement systems in the United States, in Canada, and in Europe, in terms of, if you go to fill up your vehicle or you buy certain things in a store, there are different weights or sizes, or even, or in ounces, or, a quart this, or, a liter this, but, like they're all different. And so we don't have one system of measurement. We've adopted the metric system because it does make the most sense scientifically, but the US hasn't. So you can show kids, that this has been developed over how many thousands of years. You can use those found items outside. The Indigenous calendar, talking about that, right? Like the 13 moons and the 28-day cycle. It's most cultures, ancient cultures particularly, that was what they went by. And they're still religions that do that, right? Judaism and Islam still go by the moon. And so, there isn't one way of doing that, but that's the Indigenous calendar. So you can talk about that and then different types of calendars. The phenology, right? So there's a cyclical and seasonal nature phenomenon, like talking about that, seasons, and particularly in relation to changes in the daylight and climate and the cyclical occurrences in plant and animal life. And those all relate science and math, right? And then there's a symmetry and asymmetry. So you can look at those things, right? When you talk about a snowflake, or you talk about the rings of a tree, when you cut a tree, and you can look at, cutouts of those and that sort of thing. So I got some of those ideas from this, Mr. Brackett, that's okay. Outdoor math. So there's a link for you guys there as well, and just to make sure to check everything. Yesterday. Yeah, so I put a link for you guys. There's a book, and to Strong Nations. So Strong Nations and Good Minds are excellent Indigenous resources, and they're Indigenous owned as well. But this is a really great one for young ones, giving you lots of ideas for the different seasons and things that you can do in terms of, this covers the counting, addition, subtraction, multiplication, and division. Yeah, so there's lots of stuff in there. Some other things, right? So you can do again, I cannot talk today, collaboratively built outdoor student learning activities for specific times of the year in your schoolyard, right? You can look at moons, different moon cycles, right? Falling leaves in moon in October. You can look at social emotional learning in number sense, build resistance and sense of identity. So draw and design numbers of sticks and loose parts. Spatial sense, so sort, identify, compose, and decompose shapes with natural objects. Create and describe patterns with leaves. I think we all kind of do that, but you can look at it from an Indigenous perspective too, right? Data management, collect and sort colorful leaves by attributes, organize collections into pictographs and bar graphs. And I met a teacher in Fort McMurray when I was doing some land-based learning stuff with their school and taking the kids outside in groups and doing some of that work. Like I said, I didn't even take my drum because I didn't want to take it on the plane, but I took my rattle that I made, and it on one side I painted a medicine wheel, on the other side I've got my Métis symbol. But just using a rattle and medicines, like I had our 4 main medicines with me, and I did lessons outside just based on that, and we did some time outside where I got the kids to do, like a place-based learning activity where they were sitting and had to close their eyes. I put on a timer for 5 minutes. They had to listen to the sounds outside. What was different? What was, what would children who were playing at that time, because that area is on Cree land, it's like, what would little Cree children be running around playing? What would they hear? What would they not hear? We talked about that, right? And the kids loved it, and it was actually so grounding for them, and they were so calm. Teachers were so surprised each class, how calm the kids were taking that time to be reflective. And so you could do that with any math concepts as well, right? You could take that and get them to sit with some materials and things like that and just close their eyes and just be in the moment and calming them down too. So there's also, you can do this for February, so data management. So use mathematical language, terms like impossible, unlikely, equally likely, likely, and certain to describe likelihood of weather events. And then of course you can track the weather, right? See the temperature. You could do that, and that also be done in a data management system. Number sense, right? So we're talking about using snow designs, prefer share representation of problems. Social emotional, again, and spatial is going for a walk to respond to stress, help them build personal resistance while looking for those patterns in the schoolyard. Cloud and weather patterns, like, so I say all these things, getting them to reflect in their journals. Even the little ones, if they can't write, they can draw pictures, and you can, like we do with the little ones, and write underneath what they were talking about. And so I do have a link there as well for Math on the Land. There's some more resources there. So there's lots of hands-on stuff we can do, right? So I just picked out 4 particular ones that I thought I could focus on for this session. So blanket making, and of course, kids, if they're little, they're not necessarily going to have a blanket, but you could do squares, right? You could do on paper and put it together as though it was a blanket. Beading, right? Lots of beading stuff, and I know lots of teachers already do that, especially the young ones. Weaving, and there is some weaving that they can do for sure, some simple stuff. So you can adapt the lesson plan I'm going to show you, and then obviously counting and using numbers in an Indigenous language. Now, I'm not going to show the video for Deborah Sparrow. I just don't have time, but I do have a link in here for you. She does a presentation. It was at university level. Blanket making is a mathematics and science practice and pedagogy. So that'll be there if you would like to watch that to get a bit more information about that. But in the First Nations Education Toolkit from Manitoba, I'm going to show you this one. It's a huge PDF file, and there's so many resources in Manitoba that you can go and find. But this one, the number of the page in here. There we go. So this one is the making of a star blanket. No, oh, sorry, I'll try making nauseous. So yeah, so this one is a really good one. And then there's also pre-reading materials required that you can look at that is available online as well. But star blankets are very common to Cree people. So like where I grew up, there are lots of star blankets, and I know that there are people that teach about doing them here as well. And again, like you'll notice here, it says you can do it by folding paper into different shapes, patterns, and designs, and adding color. So like I was saying, it doesn't have to be a physical blanket, because obviously that may not be something that you're able to do. Although if you are, that'd be really cool. Yeah, it could be like a year project. So yeah, they give you some ideas here. There's a book that you can read for Northwest College that's online. There's also a video that you can watch, and then some strategies. So you could, work with them on different strategies. What could they do? So finding some, and obviously these are a little bit older isosceles, triangle, rhombus, but I mean, you could just do triangle, right? And the kids are like an odd shape for rhombus. And there's elder teachings in the videos as well. And then, looking at applying some strategies for that. And then you could have a talking circle to do some of your assessment, get them to write in their journals, like I said, or draw pictures, that sort of thing. And then there's a teacher reflection here as well. And there's black line masters for all that stuff. But yeah, I thought that was one idea that you might like. Because obviously shapes, right? You can do that. Everything's black on my screen. That's an idea. So beading for math. So I also wanted to show you, as I know teachers use, like I've used them too, little ones, to use beads all the time, especially the big chunky ones. The pony beads, I think that's what they're called. But to be lesson plan. And I also I found another session I was doing before, a teacher pointed out this website for bead patterns, and obviously the kids aren't going to use them at this level, but you as a teacher could go on there and make a pattern if you wanted and print it out. So obviously pony beads you can use in this one. There's a weekend bead book and an option to use the Walt's game. You need support, obviously, examples of some First Nations beadwork if you can get it. We could use pictures, obviously, from online, print those out or show them on, like an iPad or computer to the kids. And then game pieces to the Walt's game. And then you could use technology like manipulatives, obviously, to explore math, and then engage in problem solving. And then related to stories, right? So they make their counters, and then the Indigenous connections, right? So beads are directly related to Indigenous culture. And so beading had occurred here. And you could also talk about the different kinds of materials that were used. So originally, it would have been found materials on the land, things that were by the water, things like small little shells, little crystals and things like that that are found around that could be used. And then the Europeans came along, and then they had different ones that they could use, right? So that's why you see the more intricate ones, and especially Métis, which like my family that do the floral beadwork. You can also look at the difference. So like everybody has floral beadwork across the world, right? If you look at people in Europe, there's different examples of that as well. But the difference between that and Indigenous beading you could look at, as well as Métis beadwork, not all of it, but quite a bit of it has a different style to it in terms of it has more of a tail. I want to explain it. We call it mouse tracks because the way that the ends of the vine will be, it'll have these little look like mouse tracks on it. There's that, and the connection between them, and just the colors that are used are a little bit different as well. So you could talk about that. And then, we're looking at, what animals are found in Indigenous art, and you can talk about that and the different flowers, right? And then, yeah, so there's a whole lesson here on that. So I just thought that was a good example of one way to incorporate Indigenous learning. And this bead pattern maker is the one I was telling you guys about. I had somebody during session actually tell me about this one, but most of it's free, right? Online editing tools, you know how it goes. They want you to pay if you get into heavy duty stuff, but you could find a pattern that you think is, simple enough for the young ones. It's an Indigenous pattern if you wanted to do that too. And you could get them to work on that, and, obviously in a simpler way. But yeah, I just thought I'd include that because I thought it's a really neat website that's there if you wanted to use that. So weaving. So Salish weaving is the main one that we look at. The Salish people are famous, in parts of the world, even just for their weaving, the amazing stuff that they do. And each one tells a story too. And I think that's also something that can be incorporated into it, just like the beading. There's a story in the beading. Everything is storytelling, right? Dancing is storytelling. Like the drumming they were doing at the beginning, and I forgot to mention that too. I mean, even with the drumming outside, doing patterns, and doing fractions, because music, I mean, I'm a music specialist way back in the day too. And, I drum. And so, you're counting, and it's the heartbeat of Mother Earth. So you can incorporate that. Like, what is our heartbeat? How does that work? That kind of thing, right? But there's stories told through the drumming as well, through the dance, through art, through the making of blankets, through weaving. So everything is a story. So you can talk about that as well. And so that's just some examples of some beautiful Salish weaving. But yeah, I mean, I know a lot of this is definitely for older kids, but you can take this information and adapt it. And then the part that I would say, obviously, is kids can learn to do some pretty simple weaving. And if obviously this would may be too hard, but there are also, and I didn't include it here, but on YouTube, there's some pretty simple videos about how to do Métis finger weaving. So, and that kids can do for sure. It's not difficult at all. And so you could do some of that, and you could talk about the different cultures too, right? You could bring it into that, talk about the Salish people, and this is what they did. And, and then, okay, well, here's some Métis stuff. We're going to do this because this, as kids would sit and do this all the time, right? And then there's some videos that are applied to this as well. And as you can see, as an extension activity, they have the star blanket on there. So they all work together, right? And look at this. I love this, right? The kids, instead of, doing the actual weaving, if you don't want to do that, they can use the pattern blocks. We all have those, and we're teaching the kids math, and make up their own designs. What would they put if they were to make up a weave? Right. And then you see the kids here, they're doing some of that weaving, right? They can work together even on it, do some finger weaving. I just think those are some really cool ways to incorporate that. And then inquiry-based math, right? So a big part of the math curriculum is getting kids to explore on their own. And that is right up the alley of Indigenous ways of knowing and being, because Indigenous peoples, we learn by doing things hands-on and exploring. And I like to tell everybody, there is no word for failure that I know of, at least not in Cree, but I don't think in any Indigenous language on Turtle Island that is the word failure. There's just that you haven't got to your goal yet, right? You're always working on it, and you're always like, for an example, I'll give you, like, when I was little, my grandpa at the cottage, and I think mostly to keep me out of his hair sometimes, because I was always asking questions. He handed me a hammer and a nail, and he built me a Barbie house out of scraps from the cottage. So, like, some plywood that was left over and bits and pieces, and my nana had given me some materials and things like that to put in and decorate it. But I was, wanting to put some other things and do some other things with it. And so he showed me how to hammer. And of course, I'm a little girl, and the hammer is really big too, because they didn't have the little tiny ones like they do now, and the big nail, and I'm trying to hit it. And of course, I didn't quite do it right, or it would go sideways or whatever. And then he never said that's wrong or that's bad. He just took it and showed me again, do it like this, right? And there wasn't really anything said. He never said anything. He just was like, watch. I knew to watch and just do it, right? Until I got to the point where I got it right. And then when I got it right, he just nodded his head and walked away. You got it now, right? So there's never idea of failure. So that's really important. And I think to instill in kids is to that idea, keep trying and keep doing, right? So I did include this one. It has some more activities on beading, and lots of links on here, more stuff on weaving, and stuff in here, and also learning to count in an Indigenous language, which I was going to talk to you guys about more too. And then some more links to that. And then some other suggested activities. So, Indigenous stamps to make patterns as well. So not just the pattern blocks that you have there. You could have materials for soft stations that reflect First Nations culture. Use picture cards, and, like, again, Strong Nations is the site, but you don't have to do that. There's lots of stuff online too. You could just use that as an example, and looking at animals that are prominent in First Nation art. Have beading stations where you have different kinds of materials, right? Shells, stone beads, bone beads, wood beads, seed beads, if you're able to get some of those things. And obviously that would have to be for some of the a little bit older kids, because, the hands are not going to be able to hold on to some of those little small things. Again, using those 3D printed math manipulatives. And there's a handout for that. Some cooking things you could do. Dry berries. Well, there's lots of different things. You could do models of longhouses and stuff like that. And then they've got some books here as well to support math, and you can look at, and again, some more more weaving and lots of math links on here for Indigenous content as well. So that's interesting. You can make your own weave station. Then I want to look at some games. So there's two kinds of games that Indigenous people play. One is obviously that you think of as outside of the sports type one, the physical one. And then there's the logic games or games of chance. So it is true when people joke about Indigenous people liking bingo for the most part. We love games. So my girlfriend said, let's all get dressed up and go to bingo one night. I said, yes, let's do it. It's like fun. All right. So again, like I'm not going to go through every single one. You guys can take a look at this, but I'll just show you one. Let's do the stick game. Do that one. So I just want to give you as an example. So for each one of these, they give you the origins of where it's from, a little bit of the history, what kind of materials you need, what could you adapt to use as materials, because obviously the original materials are not going to be available. Like you're not going to find bones for buffalo ribs necessarily hanging around outside. You know, you're not going to hunt down a buffalo and or bison around there and do that. So you can use popsicle sticks, right? But again, what you would do is explain to the children what the original materials were, right? So in order to honor Indigenous peoples, you would say, well, this is what people would have used. This is what we're using because this is what we have, right? And so explain to them. And yeah, and it gives you all the idea of how you can play it, get what you can do with the kids from different ages, and then some physical examples of what it looks like. And let me see. Show you one. And then, like I said, they've got it linked too. So that stick game is under patterns and relations, probability, data management. Yeah. Oh, look at string games. So problem solving. Obviously, it's a little bit older kids, but this is Inuit or Navajo people do some of these games, right? And originally it would have been made out of sinew or leather thong, but obviously you can use nylon cord or any string that's available. Yeah, just give you some ideas of things that you can do and showing them how to play. And it's problem solving, right? And there's some geometry and pattern relations in there. And then we got some logic games. So this is a whole PDF as well from Burnaby Schools. And now at the top, it does go over some older kids things. There are some older ones in here, but when you get down to, yeah, there we go. So for each grade here, they give you some ideas. So they've got the outline of kindergarten and the different areas that you can cover. And then grade 1, grade 2, etc. Right, you get the idea. And then you get into the document and has a list of resources. And again, some examples. And shows you what the game pieces actually look like. And there's a unit plan in there, possible strategies that you can do for assessment. Yeah, just some different blackline masters as well, and some ideas in there. So yeah, so there's that one. Again, you know, just to give you some ideas, and you know, once you start looking at resources yourself, and you get some ideas, look at some of these links, you'll see that you know, there's some pretty simple ways to incorporate it, even though you may have thought that there weren't. So I've got a few more resources on here. I have a few more minutes and I'll get through some of them and we'll see how much time we have left and I'll leave some time at the end. So this is University of British Columbia, so BC. Again, BC has some really awesome resources. So on here, looking at their Salish baskets, so there's making baskets is also something you can do for math. And they also have a link to a project that they did with circles and line units and kayak design. So again, they're young kids, but you can look at kayaks and you can look at canoes and things like that, and you can see what you think you can use with that, and Navajo math circles, that sort of thing. And then lots more games on there. They've got a link to Math Catcher, which is an outreach program, but there's also some really great ideas in there. And then the Aboriginal Mathematics K-12 network in BC for UBC. And then they've got links to a lot of their math curriculum on there that's really great. Too. BC has amazing teaching curriculums. They've been working on this for, wow, I'd say like 30 years. Oh, I do want to for sure. It's not going on to, sorry, it's not going on to the site. I want my cursor is not going on here. I'm gonna pull it up then. If it's, I'll actually, I'll tell you, it's Simon Fraser University, and they have a whole bunch of videos and links on there to videos and things like that for teaching math for really young kids. So there's that. Traditional math, and again, like I'm not going to show you this YouTube video because I'm not going to make this all about videos, but this is a really excellent video if you get a chance to watch it. It is long, but you can skip through some of it. And he actually helped me greatly when I was writing the curriculum for Kataskanau, because he really opened my mind to a lot of these ideas in terms of, what could you use as math concepts. So he was really great. So I encourage you to take a look at this video and at least get some ideas. But he's a math specialist, he's Indigenous, and I said, oh, that's going to start. So Brian Belfield, and yeah, anyways, great ideas in there if you want to watch that. This is how you can incorporate math, and like I said, he opened up my brain about that. Let me see. Maybe this one. I'm trying to pick up the best ones before we're done. Oh, goes back to the same thing. Oh, not one. Another video as well. Again, it's not as engaging because the other gentleman is like a teacher and he's going over materials and he's Indigenous and he's showing you how to do this. So this guy's more of a lecture.
Self-employed in Canada?
You assume you're supposed to skip those. You pay for it.
Edward Doolittle is a Mohawk from Six Nations in Southern Ontario. He earned his PhD in pure mathematics at the University of Toronto in 1997.
There. Anyways, yeah, so you can, the idea. So he's it was the University of Winnipeg Indigenous Scholars Speaker Series, and he does go over more about what is Indigenous mathematics. So like I said, if you have the time to look at that as more of a pedagogical background from an academic, and that would be very helpful as well. There we go. Come on. So this refers back to that original video I showed you. So some of the ideas in there. So the mathnetwork.ca, but it's a video series that they have on their website. There's a link there. So there's more than one. And so what I refer to in terms of teaching, like using a drum to teach fractions, and then you can incorporate things like some songs that are Indigenous and explain the background of some of these songs, or if you've got somebody that in your community that can come in and do that. You can talk about dance, so Indigenous dance, right? It's the way that it's presented and the different kinds of dances that Indigenous people do. And so there's just so many different ways you can incorporate that when you're talking about rhythm, right? And math and using those concepts for teaching kids different information. But I'm going to stop there. I'm just going to stop recording.